So what exactly do everyday Americans stand to lose or gain, and why is this unpopular bill so essential to this administration? Douglas Holtz-Eakin is president of the America Action Forum, having served as chief economist to President George W. Bush, and Jared Bernstein chaired President Biden's Council of Economic Affairs. They join me now. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me start with you, Doug, because if we were to take the CBO's projections of $3.3 trillion adding to the deficit over a 10-year period of time, do you believe what the administration is saying, that the economic stimulus from the tax cuts would offset this burden to the deficit? Or are we at risk for long-term fiscal instability, as many of its vocal opponents argue?
Well, I certainly think it's closer to the latter. We're already in a dangerous fiscal position. This makes it worse. I look at this bill and I don't see much in the way of stimulus and pro-growth policy. There are some business investment provisions for expensing equipment investment, research and development costs, and some structures, but that's about it. The rest is extension of current law, which gives you nothing, and a whole bunch of political favors and handouts to particular classes. Not much there in the way of pro-growth tax policy.
Jared, your successor, the CEA Chair Stephen Moran, just this morning said that this bill will cause an investment boom and more reshoring, as well as lowering the deficit, as the administration has been saying all along. He also says that the CBO ignores a number of things, including the better growth in this bill for the economy, investments in new factories, that it completely ignores tariff revenue, which they claim will bring in $3 trillion over the next decade. And then he goes on to include deregulation, $1.5 trillion from DOGE cuts, and what he says will ultimately lead to $8.5 to $11 trillion in deficit reduction over the next decade. Just if you want to rebut those claims, now you have the floor.
Thank you. The only people who believe, or who will even make an argument that this bill is going to reduce the deficit or the debt, are people who are being paid to believe that. Every estimate I've seen, and I've looked at nonpartisan, left, right, I don't care who it's from, has been very clear that this bill will increase our deficit and debt. And in fact, I saw a nonpartisan estimate this morning of the Senate bill taking our debt ratio, our debt as a share of GDP, to about 130% 10 years from now. Now that's a lot higher than it was even in World War II, when our debt ratio topped out at 110%. And you have to ask yourself, for what? Why are we willing to accept, or why, I shouldn't say we, because you mentioned how unpopular it is, why are Senate Republicans and the president endorsing a level of debt that is beyond that of when we were fighting fascism? What are we getting for this? A bunch of transfers from low-income people, from their Medicaid and their nutritional support to the wealthiest through a set of tax cuts, which we just don't even need right now. So that is very misleading rhetoric from my predecessor.
It is objectively one of the most regressive pieces of legislation that we've seen. And Doug, the Yale Budget Lab estimates that the richest 20% would receive an average of $6,000 in tax cuts, while the bottom 20% would lose $560 per year under this bill. Is there any economic rationale for why it is broken up this way? And what are you hearing from Republicans who are concerned about this very issue?
Well, I think Republicans who are concerned about this issue recognize this is an extraordinary missed opportunity on two fronts. I mean, front number one is obviously the fiscal outlook, which was in a terrible shape when the Trump administration came into office, and now will be worse. This is going to have negative implications for every American and puts us at risk. The second missed opportunity is to build on the 17 Act's better parts of pro-growth tax policy and actually raise the trend growth rate in the United States. You know, back when we took care of business on the fiscal front in the 20th century, the standard of living doubled roughly every 30 years. Now it's on track to double every 56 years. So people can see their access to the American dream slipping away. Better economic growth is the solution to that for everyone. You don't have to pick winners and losers. Everyone is better off. And this is a real miss on that front.
Jared, assuming there aren't significant changes here in the House, ultimately there will be some to put up a fight. But given that this is a signature piece of domestic legislation for this president, I think it's safe to assume that in one way, shape, or form, closer to where it is now, it will be signed by the president in the coming days. Can you talk about what that does for the legislation that you helped pass and put forward under the Biden administration, which we should note was passed in a bipartisan manner? I'm specifically referencing Build Back Better.
Yeah, one of the things in this bill that we're hearing a lot of complaints about, and I'm talking about the Chamber of Commerce, Elon Musk, as you mentioned earlier, is the extent to which they are not just cutting back investments in renewable energy, which not only produces less costly energy, we're going to need a lot more electricity in this country, especially if we want to lead in artificial intelligence. But they also have buried in here an actual tax, a new tax on the production of renewable energy in this country. So it doesn't just take away what President Biden added in terms of contributing to the production that we're going to need to be globally competitive in the future. It actually taxes the creation of renewable energy sources. This is clearly misguided. And again, the president and the Republicans are hearing from their constituents, from the Chamber of Commerce, that this is just a big overreach in that regard.
Yeah, you've seen a number of oil and gas sector companies. You've seen a number of red states really express alarm over this as well, because that's where they've invested a significant amount of resources over the last several years and are seeing real profit in terms of renewable and green energy and solar power as well. We're talking about states like Texas, not necessarily even California here, which has also been benefiting from that. Doug, the president was asked in Florida just moments ago about what has always been viewed as the holy grail, and that is entitlement programs really taking a beating here. Medicaid specifically as a
very major role, I think, for many of my colleagues, and a number of those colleagues are for all the tax cuts and they're against Medicaid. But I do think the Trump factor was really persuasive, because this does bipartisan harm across the land.
I was looking at a poll from just Vermont. 67% of Vermont residents wanted Congress to block this, what Trump calls the big, beautiful bill. But I thought the more striking number was that 69% of independents were against that. Did you have that conversation as well? I understand that you're afraid of the blowback from President Trump, but what about from your constituents?
Well, I did. No, that is exactly what I did. In fact, all of us adopted different states. So, for instance, I was constantly speaking about West Virginia and giving the statistics about how many people in that very poor state, very rural state, would lose health care, would lose access to nutrition programs. And I'd make my point, and my colleagues obviously all have to make their decision. But what I was arguing to my colleagues is that whatever it is you think about Trump and the politics of this, you have to acknowledge that there's a real impact on your community hospitals, on folks on Medicaid, and on these nutrition programs. That's real, and you know, each senator makes their own vote. But when you look at what is going to happen to people who are on Medicaid, whatever state they're in, it's really bad. And that includes, by the way, like our seniors. 2 out of 3 seniors who are in nursing homes, that's paid for by Medicaid. Our kids who are disabled and the parents who so love those kids, they absolutely have to have Medicaid. We're taking it away. So it's an astonishing legislative act that was just passed with the tie-breaking vote coming from the vice president.
Arguably, Senator, to give credit where credit is due, the big argument from the president and from Republicans is that this bill was about national security, that you have to make choices, and they chose border security. They also chose what they said was military security. The president has made a lot of what happened in Iran. He believes that he stopped a war there. Whatever your belief in the realities are, let me ask you about this reality. Do you think those arguments will win the day in the House? Do you see any indications? I know this isn't your side of the aisle, but do you see any indications that there could be some changes in your mind for the better, or that the House could reject this in a more significant way?
The bill can't be improved, in my view, but there's going to be real contention in the House. You've got budget hawks over there who are astonished that this is adding $3.5 trillion. In the bill the House sent over to the Senate made worse on the deficit. That's one. Number two, you have some moderates over there who are deeply concerned about these Medicaid cuts. The Senate bill made the House bill worse. You know, on the border, we are in agreement that we have to have a secure border and that criminals should be deported. What's ironic about this is Trump actually won that argument, but after the fact, we're putting billions of dollars into these detention centers, and it's all because Trump is going that next step too far, where he's rounding up people at work sites and going after people who are not criminals and who are actually working on our farms, working in our construction industry, and not doing anything about getting some kind of status to help us on the economy.
Senator Peter Welch, thank you so much. It's always good to see you, sir.
You could see there people who have Republican bona fides, people who, again, Trump views every Republican in the country as his, like, serf, as his peasant to boss around. He's like, you all work for me, Republicans, even if you didn't vote for me, even if you're a never Trump Republican, I own you. So if you have ever been a Republican, Trump thinks you belong to him, like you're one of his staff at Trump Tower. And some of them are saying no, because what they're saying is that, again, depending on the kind of Republican you are, there's lots of them that hate this for different reasons. Because if you're a sadistic Republican, let's be clear, you think that this bill doesn't do enough to hurt the American working class and the American poor, or even the American middle class, given how the benefits only go to the top 10, top 5, top 1%, right? But more than that, if you have a soul even, you're like, look, this is unnecessarily cruel, and also, let's be clear, it's going to be bad for the economy, because a lot of the cuts here don't just affect the people hurt. And I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to say that oh, you should only care because non-poor people are getting hurt, but consider this. A lot of the cuts to Medicaid are not just going to hit those on Medicaid. A lot of the cuts to Medicaid will affect hospitals and other healthcare providers who part of their business is Medicaid. People on Medicaid are part of their business, right? They get paid whenever somebody on Medicaid uses a service at the hospital or clinic or whatever. If they lose those customers, those businesses, those hospitals, they will be forced to reduce staffing and services and all of that for everybody else. So if you have health insurance and your local hospital has a lot of people that require Medicaid, let's say you're in a rural hospital with a poor community around it, lower income community, high percentage of Medicaid users, right? What Donald has done is he's made your services weaker. It will destroy that local community because you'll lose your hospital. The nurses and doctors and administrators and all that at that hospital will lose their jobs. And the local economy, all the small businesses, will lose out too. Donald's bill destroys everyone except the billionaire class.